All right, welcome everyone. My name is Connor Brinton, and I am the founder and president of GCU Young Americans for Freedom. It's a really great honor to have Mr. Clavin out. I don't know if any of you have heard, but we actually have an overflow room because of the demand, so I think that just shows the kind of market for conservative ideas on campus, and I think that's a really great thing to kind of start the night with. So a little bit of background on kind of why I founded the club, just real quick before we start. I actually got to go out to the Reagan Ranch, with which the Young Americans for Freedom has been now owning for several years. And they keep that property just as a reminder of all of the great things that Ronald Reagan did for our country. And it was that experience that kind of made me want to start this chapter on campus. One thing, just to thank people real quick, this event would not be possible without the generosity of the Young Americans Foundation. So let's give a quick round of applause for them. Secondly, I'd like to thank our amazing Young Americans for Freedom Board. I mean, they are the hardest working team at Grand Canyon. I'm just going to say that outright. The amount of hours that we put in these past few weeks for this event, it's really been incredible to see what these kids can do. So one more round of applause for them. And then one last round of applause for all of our event donors. They're the ones who also just make this possible and kind of make it so that way we can bring out speakers like Clavin to campus. And based on the demand, that's really great. So one more round of applause. All right, so now that that's out of the way, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. So obviously, if any of you have watched the YAF lecture, we're going to try and keep this as civil as possible. So please keep all questions until the Q&A session. That'll be over here. But please, do not make a disturbance. We will have to escort you out, and we might bring someone from the overflow room in to take your seat. We just don't want to make an environment that feels unsafe for anyone. So we do have people looking out for that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Andrew Clavin. Are you all excited? Perfect. Here we go. Andrew Clavin is the author of such international best-selling crime novels as True Crime, filmed by Clint Eastwood, Don't Say a Word, filmed by Michael Douglas, and Empire of Lies. Stephen King has called him the most original novelist of crime suspense since Cornwell Woolrich. He has been nominated for the Mystery Writers of America's Edgar Award 5 times and has won twice. He has also won the Thumping Good Read Award from W.H. Smith and has been nominated twice for the Boucher Cons, Anthony? I'm sorry, I'm just going to be honest, I'm not that fluent in all these names. I did more time planning this event. His book has been translated around the world. His most recent book is a memoir of his religious journey, The Great Good Thing. A secular Jew comes to faith in Christ. Andrew is a contributing editor for City Journal, the magazine of the Manhattan Institute. His essays and op-eds on politics, religion, movies, literature have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, and elsewhere. He's also created the popular satire features Clavin on the Culture for PJTV, a very serious commentary for Glenn Beck's Blaze TV, and Revolting Truth, for Truth Revolt. He currently does a Monday through Thursday podcast known as The Andrew Clavin Show for the Daily Wire. And folks, why don't we welcome Andrew Clavin.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this actually working? Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you to the Young Americas Foundation, the Young Americans for Freedom, for arranging all this. I appreciate it. I was asked to speak about Christianity in the culture, which is an important topic to me because I became a Christian because of the culture, not because of the Bible, not because of going to church, not because of preaching, but because by reading books and watching movies that ultimately led me to Christ. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but what I want to do is I want to give what I hope will be a very brief speech, because I'd like to hear your questions, in two parts. First, I'd like to talk about where we are, where Christianity stands in the culture right now and why. And then I'd like to tell a little bit about my story, because it's a good example of how the culture can change and why and how the culture should change to bring people back to our foundational religion. But first I want to tell a joke. It's an old joke, and some of you may have heard it, but it makes a really important point, and it actually has a lot to do with what I want to say. Guy's going to a job interview, and it's the big job, right? It's the job he's wanted all his life, and it's another job like this isn't going to come up for 20 years. And he's all set, he's primed, he's dressed, he drives to the office building, and he can't find a parking space. And he drives around the block, and he realizes he's going to be late for this interview. He's going to lose this job. And he starts to sweat, he starts to pray. He says, Lord, if you will send me a parking space, I will do whatever you want. I will go to church every Sunday for the rest of my life. If you will send me a parking space, I'll give a tenth of every penny I earn for the rest of my life to charity. I'll raise my children in the faith. I'll volunteer my time. I'll be faithful. And suddenly he's driving by the front of the building, and a car pulls out, and a parking space opens up. And he says, oh, never mind, Lord, there's one now. That's exactly where we are in Western culture's relationship with Christianity. Western culture is formed, as we know it, is formed by Christianity. It starts out as a bunch of diverse tribes and nations called Christendom. It is the people who believe in Christ. And everything you think, and everything the people who disagree with you think, and everything we fight about, and all our values, and all the things we look for and we think are good, and everything we think it is to be a human being, was all formed by the Christian church. And the result is that you are living in the freest, richest, healthiest, least oppressed, most fair civilization that has ever existed on the face of the planet. Yeah, I mean, people talk about, oh, there's microaggressions and there's, all kinds of terrible problems, and I can't use the girls' bathroom if I want to. This is the fairest, richest, freest, healthiest place that has ever existed. For millennia, people with literal shackles on their wrists, women watching their babies die of things that we can cure now with a pill, whole races of people who lived and died face down in the dirt with the boot of power on the back of their neck, looked up to heaven and said, please, Lord, send us a culture like this one. And here it is, and our attitude is, oh, never mind, Lord, there's one now. The narrative that you hear from our elites, and people, these are people I love, their books, I read their books, I know some of them, books like Steven Pinker's new book, Enlightenment Now, and my pal Jonah Goldberg's book, The Suicide of the West. They're selling a narrative that goes like this. For centuries, the church kept us in darkness and superstition. And then, hurrah, the Enlightenment came, and there was reason and science, and we were free, and we have to leave religion behind. And it's only troglodytes and fools who want to drag us back into the Dark Ages. And this narrative is old. This narrative started with the Renaissance. Petrarch, a great Italian poet, they say that he jump-started the Renaissance by rediscovering the letters of the Roman statesman Cicero. And he invented the idea that all the years before this moment were the Dark Ages. And people who lived in the Dark Ages didn't think they were in the Dark Ages. Like, nobody walked around going, these ages, they're dark. I can't wait for the Enlightenment to come so I can see what I'm doing. It's like, that didn't happen. I mean, the Middle Ages, we all say medieval, he's going to go medieval on you, it just means Middle Ages. It was a slur invented in the Renaissance. And the idea was, first we had these great Roman and Greek civilizations, and now we have the wonderful Renaissance, and everything in the middle, was the Middle Ages. It was nothing much going on. It was the Middle Ages. None of this is true. And now historians kind of are finding out that it's not true. All the things that happened in the Renaissance were prepared by the Christian church. After Rome fell and all these barbarian tribes came in to what had been the Roman Empire, it was the church who taught them how to think again, what to value, what to believe. And far from being the enemies of reason, they brought reason back to these savage tribes. Great philosophers like Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus, these are guys who took the philosophy of ancient Rome, Aristotle, and melded it with the thought of St. Paul and the gospel of Jesus and taught these people how to think again. And far from science being the enemy of religion, this is another myth that there was a famous book called The War Between Science and Religion. Christianity invented science. You know, when you look at Western science, and when I say Western science, it's a redundancy. There only is Western science. Westerners invented science. Everyone who could be credited with inventing science was a deeply believing Christian. Galileo was a dean of the church, and Newton, and Roger Bacon was a Franciscan friar. Francis Bacon, no relation, I think. These are the guys who kind of invented the idea that we should observe nature and we shouldn't be let our minds be curtailed by superstition. We should look at what's going on. Francis Bacon, just to give you an idea of the way these guys thought, the way they all thought, Francis Bacon said, "They that deny a God destroy man's nobility, for certainly man is of kin to the beasts by his body, and if he be not of kin to God by his spirit, he is a base and ignoble creature." This is what these guys believed, and why? It's why they invented science. Everything we have, everything we are, whether you're a Muslim or a Jew or an atheist, whether you're a gay activist, doesn't matter. If you are part of the West, if you are part of the great conversation of the West, the big argument of the West, you were shaped by Christianity. The church is, in some sense, your mother. And this, for me, solves part of the paradox of why Christianity is under attack. I mean, for guys like me, I'm a political conservative, and I look at my friends on the left, and they allow Islam to get away with stuff that they would never tolerate from a Christian. Depending on how you count wars, Islam is involved in something like 10 of the 12 wars going on right now. But if you point out that this may be partly because of their philosophy, you're a terrible, terrible human being. There have been approximately 6 fatal attacks by lunatics on abortion clinics that were related, the attacks related to Christianity. That, of course, shows you that Christians are violent monsters who can't hold a polite conversation. I've yet to see a gay couple go into a Muslim bakery and insist that they cater their wedding. Doesn't happen. You ever see a movie, has anybody ever seen the movie V is for Vendetta? V is for Vendetta is made by the guys who made The Matrix, right? And it's based on a graphic novel, dystopian, futuristic novel, where the Christians are the fascists, right? The Christians are the terrible fascists. A great actor named Stephen Fry plays the gentle gay professor who has to hide in his basement where he hides his Quran. And somebody says to him, the Quran, he says, well, you don't have to believe in it to appreciate how beautiful it is. Meanwhile, the Christians come down and they carry him away because they're the tyrants. There are 8 Muslim countries where homosexuality is a capital offense. They kill you for it, right? But you never hear anybody on the left talk about this at all. You never hear them say a word. But if Mike Pence, God forbid, the vice president, should say, you know, as a Christian, I'm not sure that homosexuality is necessarily the optimal thing. It's like, oh my God, this man, Joy Behar on The View, this man is mentally ill. He talks to Jesus. Jesus, he's out of his mind. You go online, you can look up Mike Pence. All you'll find are images of him with death rays coming out of his eyes, Well, and so why is it? Why the disparity? It's because the church is our mother. I have a daughter. You'll listen to things from your friends. If a girl gets dressed in the morning and her roommate says to her, that top is a little revealing, put on a sweater, she'll put on a sweater. But if her mother says to her, you're going out like that, it's like, Mom, please, you're calling me terrible names. We react to our parents differently. They say your parents can always press your buttons because they installed the buttons. the church installed our buttons, and it drives us crazy. And this also explains this incredible hostility among our elites in Hollywood, in the news, toward the Christian religion. I mean, I hardly have to rehearse the things that happen, but I'll go through some of them because they're important. We all know that anytime a Christian shows up in a movie, he's a bigot, he's small-minded. If he's a priest, he's raping people. You know, it's always the villain. I mean, I could go through, you know, Carrie, they just remade Carrie. Stephen King is the evil Christian who locks her daughter in a closet because she's developing breasts, because Christians hate breasts. We don't actually reproduce. We reproduce by osmosis, you know. Mitosis, sorry. You know, Footloose, where you're not allowed to dance, you know, because you're a Christian. My favorite is, this reference may be too old for some of you. You know the Da Vinci Code? You ever read the Da Vinci Code? The Da Vinci Code, the Catholics assassinate people because they don't want them to find out that Jesus was married and has a descendant. And I thought, so what? You know, what's his descendant? King of the Jews? You know, good luck getting that job, you know? It's like, I'm showing up, I am the king of the Jews. Even the Bible movies are anti-Christian. You know, this is one of the funny things. Part of the narrative of intellectuals was that religion was supposed to disappear, right? Because it's mom. We left home. They're the old folks. They don't even know how to, you know, program an iPhone. They're full of superstition and darkness and stupidity. We're nothing like them. We're nothing like them. When 9/11 happened, truly in the intellectual world, one of the biggest shocks was that anybody cared enough about God to kill you for it. I mean, that was one of the things that shocks people, that religion was still such a force in the world, and they could understand it because it was a force for evil, which is what they thought anyway. Just the other day, David Brooks, who's one of the very, very elite columnists in the New York Times, said, there's not Islamic terrorism because of Islam, it's because these are young men without jobs. I thought that's not what they say. You know, they say we are killing you because of Islam. And it's like David Brooks is saying, no, my friend. You know, I'm with the New York Times. I know why you're really killing you. When Mel Gibson made The Passion of the Christ, he paid for it out, you know, $25 million out of his own pocket, which, okay, he had in his pocket. But still, you know, that's what he put up for it because they had no clue that it was going to earn, I'm not even sure now, I think it's earned close to $1 billion, that film. If it had been about anything else, if it had been about Spider-Man, do you think they would have made sequels? You know, I mean, if it had been about anything else, the Book of Acts would have been in the can the next day. They would have filmed that thing, you know, like Revelation, you know, Jesus, he's back, and this time he's ticked off, you know. But they were stunned, they were shocked, they destroyed. I mean, I used to joke that, you know, what happened to Jesus in that movie was nothing compared to what happened to Mel in Hollywood, because they basically destroyed him for making that film. And yeah, did he have dark parts? You know, who ever heard of an artist with dark parts? Of course, he had dark parts to his personality, but they seized on them and destroyed them. Roman Polanski raped a little girl, that was fine, but Mel Gibson believed in Jesus, get out of town. But slowly, because there was so much money on the table, they started to build faith-based divisions in their companies, the studios. And even then, when they made Bible movies, they were anti-Bible. They would make movies like Noah with Russell Crowe, where God destroys the world because we're not environmental enough, we're not green enough. There was no sin. It was just, you're not treating, you know, God was just green. It's like the green God was coming to destroy the world. They made the Moses story, Gods and Kings, with the Batman guy, Christian Bale. And Bale went out and gave interviews and said Moses was kind of a terrorist. So Christians didn't show up for the movie. And now, so help me, what they say in Hollywood is people don't like biblical movies. And I say to them, yeah, they don't like biblical movies that trash the Bible, you know? That's not what they do. But they are so divided, so hostile toward the faith that formed them, that they cannot get it through their heads that people might believe. Now, our response is equally problematical. When I say our, I mean the Christian response is equally problematical for me. There are a lot of Christians in Hollywood. We meet in secret, but we do meet, and we talk about things, how to make movies. And they do have figured out how to get movies made and how to make them cheaply and how to make a big profit on them. But the movies, you I know people who make them, and I don't want to say that they're awful, but maybe they're not helpful. They're all the same, like a professor says there's no God, but then they convince him there is a God, and he gets hit by a bus, but it's okay, he's going to heaven, It's great, everything's fine. And then they sing a rock song. Or, like two young people have sex, the girl gets pregnant, because in Christian movies, you can never have sex out of wedlock without getting pregnant. Like in real life, people have sex out of wedlock, and they're like, hey, that was good. But in Christian movies, you're in trouble the minute you look at each other across the room. And then she's gonna get an abortion. No, he finds Christ and he takes care of her, and everything's great. Everything's always great. So why do I hate these films? I did not become a Christian until I was baptized at the age of 49. I made my living as a crime writer, writing tough guy stuff. That's what I loved. I loved stories about hookers and gangsters and killers and cops. That's what I wrote stories about. And when at the age of 49, I realized that I was a Christian, which took me completely by surprise. I drove up into the hills. I live in California, so I pray a lot in my car because it's the only place you're alone. And I drove up into the hills, and I said, please, God, whatever happens, do not let me become a Christian writer. Because I was so afraid that one day I would be writing these stories about gangsters and killers, and then I'd be baptized, and the next day I'd be writing stories about like Susie lost her bunny, but Jesus brought it back again, And I just like, please don't let that happen to me. And the reason for this is because of my own story and where I came from. Let me just tell you a couple of like scenes from a 35-year conversion. I was born and raised a Jew. And I was trained in the Jewish faith, but my parents didn't believe in God. So it didn't make any sense to me. Why am I talking this foreign religion? Why am I wearing the funny hat? What am I doing here if there's no God? So I was estranged from the Jewish religion by the time I was 13. I walked away. But I loved these tough guy writers. It's a great strain of American writers, guys like Ernest Hemingway, Raymond Chandler, who wrote the famous Philip Marlowe mystery stories, Dashiell Hammett, who wrote The Maltese Falcon. These were my heroes, and I wanted to be a tough guy writer like them. And so I decided, well, I better study these guys and see what they're talking about. And I started to learn that one of the things that linked them all together were themes from chivalry. The Maltese Falcon was kind of a holy grail story. Raymond Chandler was always comparing Philip Marlowe to a knight. And Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises is also linked to the story of the Holy Grail. So I started to read the stories of the Arthurian knights and the Holy Grail, and I realized these books were about Christian manhood. They were how to be a man when you are a Christian. That's what the Arthurian legends are about. So I thought, well, I don't know anything about Christianity, right? We didn't even have a New Testament in the house. So I went out and bought a New Testament. And I went in my room, and I lay down on my bed, and I started reading the Gospel according to Luke. I think I picked that one because it had the Christmas story in it, and Christmas was nice, And my father walked in on me. Now, I don't want to give you too much information. I was a 15-year-old boy, and it was the 60s, okay? I was way sexually active. He could have walked in on me with a girl. He certainly could have walked in on me reading pornography. He would have laughed that off. But to find me reading the gospel, he was furious. I mean, he was furious. He's really four-letter words just spilling out of his mouth, this kind of bubbling tar of anger, wagging his finger in my face, his nose pressed like this close to my nose. He said to me, if you ever even think of converting, I will disown you. And I was like, I just want to know about the culture. I just want to know what's in these stories, what makes these stories so great. So skip ahead a few years, I'm in college, and you've probably I'm sure they don't teach it here, but you've probably all heard of moral relativism and this idea that all cultures are exactly the same. There's no such thing as good or evil. It's just something that people make up. This was just seeping in to university life when I was a kid. It was just coming in, and it's what they were teaching us, and it was kind of the fresh new idea, and everybody was grabbing hold of it. When I was 19, I read a novel called Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Anybody read it? Okay, well, yeah, one of the towering achievements of Western literature, Russian literature, but still. So, not to give too much of it away, but I do have to give some of it away. It's a story about a poor student named Raskolnikov in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, who comes up with this idea that there's no such thing as a moral law. It's just something that people think of, and therefore a great man should be able to rise above the moral law. In a few years, this was going to become popular philosophy with the works of Nietzsche, but Nietzsche hadn't published yet, so Dostoevsky was kind of a prophet. He saw it coming down the pike. So Raskolnikov decides he is above the moral law, and he decides he's in debt to a pawnbroker, this female pawnbroker, so he decides he's going to kill her. Why not? So he takes an axe and he kills her, and while he's killing her, her sister walks in and he chops her up too. And he slowly comes to realize that he was wrong, that his theory was wrong. He has violated the moral law. And with the help of a friend who is a prostitute, she begins to lead him to Christ. And I remember I read this book and I put it down and I covered my face with my hands. And I thought, he's right. Not about the Christianity part. I thought that part was pure mythology. I didn't think that didn't touch me at all. But what touched me was the idea that there was a moral law seemed to me indisputable. And once you find that's indisputable, you are on your way. There's no escaping God from that moment. So even though it took me 30 years, I was 19, even though it took me 30 years to get there, that book, that novel, turned the ship of my life toward God. Have you ever been into a Christian bookstore? Like Crossways or Lifeways or all, they all have the same name, but go in there one day and say, have you got the book about the axe murderer and the hooker? It wouldn't happen, right? They would not do it. That is not what Christian literature, Christian art, which was at one point the greatest art mankind has ever produced, the music of Bach, the Sistine Chapel, I would argue Shakespeare as well. Now it's all this squeaky clean stuff. You know what I think is the best Christian work of the last 20 years? The Sopranos. The Sopranos is a gangster story. It's filled, every other word is the F word, is filled with nudity and violence and killing. And the Spirit of God hovers over this thing almost visibly as these people violate every single moral law there is. It's the world. It looks like the world. So I'll tell you one last story and then wrap it up and just tell you why my life and our culture are related. I've lived two lives, at least two, maybe three now. But till the age of 28, I was a really dark, twisted, depressed, miserable human being. Just I was a sick person. And since that time, I have lived a life of increasing joy. I mean, it has been a beautiful thing. I can barely remember what it was like to be that guy. The worst moment of my life came when I must have been about 28, 29, when things got so bad, I decided I had to kill myself. I had a wife, same wife I have today, who I loved then as I love her now. I had a little daughter. My daughter was about this big, and I just thought they would be better off without me. And I was sitting alone in a dark room, drinking whiskey and smoking cigarettes, and I was thinking to myself, the problem is, I don't know how to live. I just don't know how to go on feeling the way I feel. And so I was thinking about throwing myself off the roof. I can't say I would have done it, I don't know, but I was thinking about it pretty hard. In the background, I had a radio on, and the radio was playing a baseball game, a Mets baseball game, and there was a player on the Mets named Gary Carter. He was the catcher. And I loved Carter. He was one of those guys who would slide into a brick wall to get to second base. I mean, he was just one of those absolute, dirty uniform players. But he was a Christian. And every time they interviewed him after a game, if he hit a home run or something, he'd be, Jesus, Jesus, praise Jesus, praise Jesus. And it used to make me, it used to send a chill up the back of my neck. It was like he had pulled an earthworm out of his nose. I mean, that's the way I reacted to this Jesus, Jesus, Jesus stuff. I just think, Gary, just stop, it's just a home run. While I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know how to live, Carter drives in the winning run with a ground ball that he beat out to first base. And he had terrible knees because he was a catcher, right? He was crouching all the time, so his knees were gone. But he beat out the throw to first base, and that drove in the winning run. And after the game, the interviewer came up to him and said, how did you do it? How do you run when your knees are gone? How do you run so fast when your knees are gone? If at that moment, Gary Carter had said, oh, Jesus, Jesus, praise Jesus, I wouldn't have heard a word he said, not a word. But all he said was, Sometimes you have to play in pain. And the minute I heard that, I thought, that's the answer to my question. That's how you live. Sometimes you got to play in pain. I can do that. I'm a tough guy. Life is tough. I'm tough. I can play in pain. That was the last time I ever thought of suicide in my life. I would like to go back and slap that kid in the head for even thinking about it at all. But my life turned around within weeks. Within weeks, everything had changed. My life went on a totally different path. I thought I was in the bowels of hell. I was at the end of a tunnel. I just didn't see it. And here's what I think today. I think that God was speaking to me through Gary Carter. And sometimes I can't get through the story without breaking down a little bit because it really does move me. I think that God was speaking to me through Gary Carter. But he knew that if he used his name, I wouldn't hear him. So I want you to consider this for just a minute. The King of heaven and earth set aside his name, the name most high, as they say, to talk to me, a schmuck, who was thinking of killing himself. That kind of humility is how we have to take the culture back. If you think about Lord of the Rings, one of the great Christian novels of all time, nobody has a religion in Lord of the Rings. Nobody prays. Nobody talks. I don't even think the word God is in Lord of the Rings. Maybe, I don't know. I don't remember. It's such a big book, I can't remember. Think about George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones. He's an atheist. Everybody has a religion in Game of Thrones because he's always tearing at religion. One of the reasons his themes don't make any sense is because he doesn't have God, but he has resurrection, so it doesn't actually make any sense. But he's attacking God, so he always is showing people worshiping. Tolkien doesn't have to do that because he is talking about the fact that God is interwoven into the truth of the world. Here is the moment we are at, okay? And it makes me very optimistic. Our atheist friends who are running the culture have ceased to make sense. That's what happens when you pull the bottom block out of the Jenga tower, it falls down, right? They are talking utter nonsense. When they say to you, there's no such thing as right and wrong, therefore if you judge another culture, you're wrong. You go, well, if there's no such thing as right or wrong, why shouldn't I judge another culture? You say, well, you have to respect every culture. Well, my culture is the culture that doesn't respect your culture. You have to respect my culture, not respecting your culture. They're not making any sense. They sit around and they say men and women are completely the same. The internal life of a man and the internal life of a woman, completely the same. And, I think, okay, I've lived a long time. That's not the way it looks to me. But, great, believe what you want. But then they say, oh, I'm a woman in a man's body. And you say, well, if there's no difference, how do you know? How do you know? If men and women are exactly the same, what would it be like to be a woman in a man's body? It would just be like being a man in a man's body. They're just the same. They're not making any sense. Almost everything they say doesn't make any sense. Our response to sell them a squeaky clean Jesus, Jesus, Jesus message is not going to get anywhere. Jesus, God is God of the real world. He is not God of Candyland. He speaks in the lives of bad guys, and he speaks through the lives of bad guys. He speaks when people are doing the worst possible things. And the arts are about the dramatic, terrible things that humans do. All we have to do to win this battle is speak the truth. The simple truth, not about Jesus, about life, about what life is like. I read scientists now, they say there's no free will. Does anybody live as if there's no free will? They tell me there's no self. I always love that when a guy sits there and says there's no self, and I go like, who is saying that to me? What are you talking about? They say the self is an illusion. I think, to whom? To whom? Everybody knows the truths of Christianity are true. Everybody knows it. Every single person knows that he is not a piece of meat. Everyone knows it. He may say it, it may sound good in philosophy class, but he knows it's not true. Every single person knows that the logic of the world is not the moral logic of life. Everybody knows it. People die for things that are higher, that have higher value for life, and you wouldn't do that if life was all there was. All we have to do is speak the truth, and we will win because we make sense and they don't. And I just think this is a tremendous moment when the culture is open to everybody, because the movie companies have lost control and the publishing companies have lost control. It's all online and we're all talking to each other. All we have to do is speak the truth, and the truth will set us free. Thank you very much for coming. Now, don't ask hard questions.
Up for some questions right now. So if you guys have a question in mind, go ahead and please line up right here along this walkway. And then when I call you up, if you could just come up here and give me your name, what you're studying, and then your question for Andrew.
And by the way, I'm happy to talk about politics too, but I wanted to talk about what they asked me to talk about.
So the line will form right here. First one, come on up.
I don't go to school though.
You're fine.
I'm fine.
Just stand right
My
here.
parents told me it wasn't fine not to go to school. Here, back?
Right here.
Here.
Perfect.
Well, first I drove 5 hours from Las Vegas to get here.
Oh my God.
Not a lot of culture there.
Don't applaud for that. You just encourage them. That's
Just to get away from my wife and kid, of course. Also, your daughter says hi. I don't know why she has to relay that through Twitter to me, to you, but you should work on that.
that is sad. That's sad. Yeah.
Well, you'll figure it out. My question is, you talked a lot about religious culture, and I think that in terms of that culture war, we do have a chance, but in terms of pop culture, I hate to say it a different way, but we're not cool. We're just not cool on TV. We're not cool in the movies. You know, it's like in grade school when the cool kids were deciding what could and what couldn't be said. That's still what's going on, except now they're tenured professors and CNN news anchors. So what can we do in terms of, like, I think we have good content, but the wrapping, something is going wrong with the presentation. And I know I'm asking this of a guy who titled a book Werewolf Cop, but you know, so what can we do in terms of that? And also, what does seem to be cool is this pseudo-intellectualism. So how can we combat that, and how can we also kind of be cool in the pop culture, right?
Great question. First, you got to stop trying. Nobody's cool if they try. That's the first thing. But the other thing is this. When you look at the history of the arts, and this is something I've studied and thought about my whole life, different arts rise up at different times. Right now, it's a golden age of television. You know, you can turn on television and see some actual great works. When I was a kid, novels were a big thing. Now they're not. You know, movies in the 30s. I mean, you go back and look at 1939. Almost every great movie was made in 1939. Art forms rise at certain times because of what you just said. Because the elite kids, the cool kids, do not make any sense. That's why I do satire. I didn't start out as a satirist, but I do satire because they're hilarious. I mean, you really don't have to write it. You just report it. You just report what they're saying. Anytime you make people laugh, you're cool. I mean, anytime you can make, and they're just buffoons. They're knuckleheads. And so you can just make people laugh by making fun of what's going on. I mean, look, I think good, you know, the good adventure stories are great. Obviously, the superheroes are a big deal. I'm not a big superhero fan, but that's a big deal. There's a lot of really interesting stuff being done in science fiction now because technology is increasing to a point where our humanity is threatened, and so that creates these kind of Philip K. Dick situations of what happens if they implant a false memory in you. What happens when they can actually turn a man into a woman? Then what happens? You know, what happens if they transport you to another place, but you're still in this place? There's all kinds of stories to be told that can be answered through a spiritual perspective. And you just have to find the way to speak. It really is. You just have to find the way to speak. But it cannot be that the cool kids are going to talk crap forever and get away with it. That's not what's going to happen.
Oh, I'm sorry. How's it going? I'm Zane Courtney, and I'm actually a film major here at GCU.
Cool.
So, if that's not funny enough. And so, and so as a content creator, as a guy who, you know, maybe wants to go to Hollywood or New York or somewhere like that to be a Christian influence for these people, you know, what does a guy like me have to bring to the table so that we're not just these Jesus kind of people, right? To be able to relate and to actually expose the kingdom of God as it exists on earth, right? So what would you say to a content creator who really wants to be that light in a realistic way?
Well, first of all, I think that you cannot be, one of the problems that insurgent movements have, whether it's conservatism, which is now kind of the cool, now conservative kind of the rebels, or Christians trying to move in. One of the problems that insurgent movements have is a kind of secret hope that the people that they're trying to kill will love them. So we call it being John McCain. When you secretly are hoping that the New York Times will love you for pointing out that the New York Times is the worst paper on earth, right? But you're secretly hoping they'll do a feature about you, The movie business, which I've worked in extensively at this point, it is pretty much as bad as you think it is, and it's incredibly hard to get into, and everybody wants to do it. So when you go in and say, oh, and I'm a Christian conservative, you're done, right? You're toast. However, you notice they don't censor movies. They censor YouTube. Why? Because YouTube is the culture. Twitter is the culture. There are all kinds of ways now that people can make culture without going through the mainstream. And so what I would say to you is, forget the mainstream, build a culture. Weirdly, I have been on the cutting edge of all these things. I did an app with a movie in it, right? And the app, every 3 days, the next chapter of the movie would show up in your phone. It was a ghost story called Haunting Melissa, and your phone would go, Melissa. And every time it happened, I'd go like, it's terrifying. I mean, that stuff takes money, but there are people willing to give the money, and some of it doesn't take money. Ultimately, I hate to say this because it's such a cliche, but if you build it, they will come. The movie business is dead. The movie business is virtually a charity at this point. TV is dying for content. If they see something good on YouTube, they will come after you.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Ryan Philbrook, and I'm studying business marketing here at GCU. And something that I find extraordinarily important is to keep our culture and this idea of Americanism, and to an extent, as you were saying, that Christendom is the motherhood of the West. And so my question to you is, how do we ensure that we can pass this along to future generations and they will continue to fight for these ideals that has built our society? Do you think that this will continue in the future, or are we going to be, in my opinion, more like Europe, where they fall into leftist doctrine and where their God is the state?
Europe is dead, as far as I'm concerned. I do. I think Europe has been dead since 1945. I basically think it's just we're watching the body being consumed. I mean, Europe was the greatest culture mankind ever produced, and I think that they are dead. And it's really interesting. I read all these academic intellectual books, and again, I mean, I could rattle off names of books, nobody's ever heard of, but I could rattle off names of them, in which in every one of them they say, they're talking about the death of Europe. The latest one is called The Strange Death of Europe. And he says, obviously what's missing is Christianity, but I just can't believe it. I just can't believe it. It's the intellectuals, right? They can't believe it. They can't grasp the miracles. They can't get the whole, what is this whole thing with, people rising from the dead? That doesn't happen. That's, I always say that atheists and believers both have the same basic thought. This stuff doesn't happen. They just have different reactions to that. But this is the problem we're facing. The problem we're facing is with the elites, okay? It's not with the common people. If you go out and look at upper class people, they go to church now. There used to be the idea was that the poor, dumb folk go to church, but that's not true. It's the people who are successful who go to church, and that's going to be really important upcoming. But the intellectuals are the guys we're missing. And I believe that that as we're speaking, as we're sitting here, there is a revival going on among the elites, and that they are starting to come around. And I know this because I know some of them, and the people who are your age are gathering together like the ancient Christians and are starting to talk about what all this means and how we can go forward and how we can believe again. And that's why I'm really optimistic about it. But I do think that they are the ones who are most put off by that old-time religion. And I like that old-time religion, but I think it is the thing that puts off the intellectuals. Our age, I don't want to go on forever, but our age is very much like the age of the French Revolution, We had a revolution in the 60s. It failed. But the waves of thought have continued to go on. At the end of the 18th century, there was a movement called the Oxford Movement, where people in Oxford started to rediscover Christianity. I think that's happening now. I think it's going to happen again. So I'm very hopeful. Was that your question? Whether it's
That answers my question. Just the future of America and
I'm very hopeful that the foundation is going to come back, and that we can build on that again.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, Mr. Clavin. First off, thanks for coming. It's a kind of starstruck to see you here at my school. My name is Ezekiel. I am a biology and sciences major, an aspiring physical therapist, soon to be first-generation college graduate. To deviate a little bit from the culture and arts and the topics, as a biomedical science major, we come across kind of certain bioethical dilemmas and problems, and particularly with public policy and things like that. I wanted to get your opinion. Do you think healthcare is a right, or should it be presented as a privilege?
I think it's a commodity. I don't think it's either. I mean, I think that it is something that we sell to people, and there is no time, because it's a bottomless commodity, there is no time at which everybody is going to get the same health care. Rich people are going to get better health care than poor people. That's just going to happen. I do believe we have reached a point where there is a base level of health care that people should get. But as we go forward, and your generation is going to live for a long time, as we go forward, there are always going to be disparities. And I think what we should always be thinking about is how to keep people free. Because once you say that I'm paying for your health care, then it's up to me whether you smoke or not. Once I say I'm paying for your birth control, it's up to me what you do with your sex life. And so we want people to stay free, and the best way for people to stay free is the free market. When a new TV comes out, it costs thousands of dollars. Within a year, it costs $100, $600, whatever. It's affordable because of capitalism, because of the free market. Every time the government gets in the way of the free market, prices go up. I think what we should be designing is a way of selling healthcare as a commodity in the free market, so it stays affordable for everybody, and those who can't have it at all will get help from the state.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Mr. Clavin, thanks for coming out. My name is also Andrew, good name. So my question kind of revolves around media. So I'm a marketing major here at GCU, and I've worked and interned with a number of different agencies that specialize in television, social media, all that kind of digital marketing, but also traditional print as well. And based on my experience and what I've seen across the entire industry is there's a very biased liberal agenda within the media, and for someone who's conservative, and ultimately too, like within an agency, your goal is to please the client and to produce good content. But for clients that I've worked for before who want these extreme liberal kind of ideologies, some of which have been Super Bowl commercials or or even like a pamphlet that they hand out at an event, how can I use my Christianity but also my conservatism to kind of change some clients? Like it's a weird question, but how do I change clients' minds? Essentially, it's like, because like I said, you're there to fulfill their goals, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure you can. That's the short answer. I think that when everybody has to do his job, and your job is to produce their content. What you can do is you can show that they can reach more people with a different message. You can help them do their commercial job better by showing them with facts and figures that there is a big audience that they're not reaching. I mean, I've been thrown out of every studio in Hollywood. Now what I go in and say to them is, I can talk to people you don't know. I can tell stories that people want to hear that you've never met. So if you go to them and say, hey, here's a client base that you can reach with a different message, that may work. That may work, but you can't change their minds because they believe what they believe. Yeah.
Hello, O Lord Clavin. I hope I got your title.
A simple Lord of the Multiverse will do.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So after the firing of Kevin Williamson from The Atlantic, it was kind of a big shock to conservatives who thought we could get into these leftist atmospheres easily. And clearly it isn't. So, and you've obviously, like you said, you've been kicked out of Hollywood studios and stuff like that. So my question is sort of, more so in terms of jobs, like if someone was in Kevin Williamson's position, should conservatives volunteer to be the quote-unquote token conservative in these leftist circles, or should we stay out of that, basically?
The only way that I would ever do it, this is the only way I can answer, the only way that I would ever do it is with a rock-solid guarantee that they would let me say what I have to say, that they would keep me on there and let me say what I have to say and not fire me for at least a year. Because I know Kevin is not the only guy I know who's been in this situation. They invite him in because he's anti-Trump, and they think, oh, we can live with that. But Kevin is a conservative guy with very outspoken opinions. And once the pressure comes, once the heat comes, they chicken out. It was a terribly cowardly thing to do and a mean thing to do, to hire a guy away from his job and then fire him for being who you always knew he was.
What about Ross Douthat, who started out as the token conservative of the New York Times?
Who is this?
Ross Douthat. Ross Douthat.
Oh, Ross Douthat, yes, yes. These guys are being, the New York Times must have taken the Kool-Aid and put it, and somehow made it part of the atmosphere. I do not know. They don't have to drink the Kool-Aid at the New York Times. They just breathe the Kool-Aid at the New York Times. Bret Stephens was an intelligent anti-Trump but an intelligent conservative columnist at the Wall Street Journal. He's now talking about repealing the Second Amendment. Ross Douthat was a devout Catholic who wrote brilliantly on religion. He's now like babbling about all kinds of how he was against Kevin Williamson. He was talking about Kevin Williamson as an extremist. It is just, look, you hang out, those are your friends, those are your employers, the pressure is on, you don't want to insult people, you don't want to go to work and have people throw rocks at you, so you change. If you want to keep your integrity, if you want to say what you're going to say, you either go to a venue that will let you say it, or you better be ready to go into the crucible.
Mr. Clavin, thank you for coming out once again.
Pleasure, thanks.
All right, so my name is Caleb and I study psychology here. So my question is about mental health. It seems that just about every problem, including liberalism, in this society comes from a mental health crisis. What do you believe we can do as a society, as Christians, with popular culture, or with the government to address this growing crisis?
It is a growing crisis. I mean, the streets of LA are now just littered with homeless people, most of whom I'm sure are mentally ill. Our mental health facility has fallen apart. They closed the institutions, which I understand were not great, but there's now nowhere to go. There's no way, a lot of insurance doesn't cover it. It is a tremendous, tremendous problem, and we need to address it. I have a problem with the pathologizing of every possible thing that goes wrong. In other words, if you're shy, you now have social discomfort disorder, and you need to be drugged, And I think that the two things that I would like to see happening, I would like to see the drug companies curtailed in selling drugs to people who have normal problems. Like, in other words, if you're in grief, you're not depressed, you don't need an antidepressant. That is capitalism gone wrong, as far as I'm concerned. That's the one thing. And the other thing is I believe we need places to put people who cannot function in the society. It's not pleasant, it's not nice, but we got to get them off the street. It's a nightmare. Does that answer your question? Or yeah.
My name is Connor Rice. I'm studying government here. First, I really want to thank you about that. That story with your dad in your room.
What's that?
That story with your dad finding you with a Bible in your bedroom.
Yeah.
I grew up in a household where I was inoculated against religion the way that, most parents inoculate their kids against smallpox. They want to keep it away from me. There was this thing where my mom or dad would always say, you don't do the right thing because you want to get into heaven. You do the right thing because you want to do the right thing. And the accusation was that if I was doing something for God or for Christianity or because I believed in Christ, it wasn't because I held love or compassion in my heart, but because I just wanted reward, right? How can I prove that I'm not selfish?
Yeah, I mean, obviously she's got it exactly wrong. You exercise to get healthy, and you live well to be well. You know, you live well to have life in abundance. You follow Christ to have life in abundance. And so all you are saying is that the moral line goes beyond life. And so you are living into that line. Now, what I was talking about before is, so is she. She also is living into that line. She also believes things that don't make sense if life just ends, right? If life just ends, you would never do anything for anybody. There would be no reason to do anything for anybody. Why? Why would you do it? It's that you are living a life that extends past life, that you have a broader moral sense than the immediate pleasure of the moment. And so it is just in the same way that you live a certain life so that you will be a healthy person. I don't try to be a healthy person so I'll live a long time. I try to be a healthy person for right now, this moment, you know? And, I have a long speech I give about this, which I don't have time to give now, but all the joy in life is by following virtue. All the joy in life is by following the right thing. If my life were miserable, I would not do what I do on the promise of a future life. I do it because it gives me joy right this second. It makes my life beautiful right this second. And that's a really good reason to do something, you know?
All right, we got time for just a couple more questions before you come up. I'm going to actually take a question from the other room. We actually have a overflow room just next door
right.
set up, and we have a question coming over from the next door.
All right, so this question is from the overflow room, and it's from Tori. And she asks, the film major earlier asked how to bring Christianity back into the movie culture. But why do you think Christianity abandoned its beauty and rich art and literature for squeaky clean bookstores and cheesy movies?
Yeah, this philosopher Schopenhauer said that it became banal optimism, he called it. Christianity has sunk into banal optimism. Somehow Christianity has lost its sense of tragedy, which is kind of a joke for a religion founded on a crucified God. It lost the sense that things are hard, they're sad. The world is sad, you can't be joyful until you know the world is sad. You will not be happy until you understand that life is tragic. That is the great understanding. That was why Christianity created such tremendous art, because it understood that if God in all his goodness came down to heaven, people would crucify him. Once you understand that, you get it. You get the world that you're living in. You stop saying things like, how can I be more successful in the world? You get it. You understand. Somehow, I think that Christianity lost its sense of tragedy, and possibly that was because of its success. One of the things about America was a place where you could be a Christian without getting killed for it. And I think maybe it made people lazy. It made people think that everything goes great. Everything goes great with Jesus. And it's just not true. And once you believe that, you can't make art anymore, because art is about real life. And I think it may just be that Christianity was so successful in creating a culture that tolerated it, that accepted it, that it lost its sense of tragedy and reality.
Hi, Mr. Clavin. Thank you for being here. My name is Carter, and I have a lighter question. I love film, and specifically the crime genre. So I was wondering, what are your top 3 favorite crime films, and why?
Well, The Maltese Falcon may be the greatest crime film ever made, and I think it's because it sort of establishes the genre, it establishes the rules, the final scene, which is right, it's almost word for word from the book, is one of the greatest scenes in movies. So many of the great crime films are old, and I don't want to give you 3 really old ones, but I do like, I'm trying to think of a modern one, because so many of the ones I love are the old ones, but I love the Chinatown is a great throwback to those old stories. It gets better every time I watch it. I didn't like it the first time I saw it, but it gets better every time I watch it. And I'm sure the minute you sit down, I'm going to think of about 7 others that I love. And I love The Big Sleep, which is also another Bogart film, but that's another great movie. If you've never seen just a little one, it's kind of offbeat. The Bank Job is really good. It's just a recent, cool little movie. Yeah.
All right, we just got time for one more question right now.
Hey, thanks for coming out, Mr. Clavin. My name's Trey. I'm studying physical therapy here. My question is, what's the best part about working for Ben Shapiro, and what's the worst part about working for Ben Shapiro?
I always say I like Ben more than Ben likes Ben. You know, happily, I am a contract. Because I'm a novelist, I've always kept away from actually being employed by anybody, so I'm just an independent contractor. I've always really liked Ben. I've always really gotten along with him. I sometimes say that, I don't know if you ever see The Godfather. Remember the scene where they machine gun Sonny out in the toll booth? When Ben disagrees with you, that it feels a little bit like that, you know, because he talks like a machine gun. But he's been absolutely great. I mean, we have always gotten along. We frequently disagree. When I told him that I was voting for Donald Trump, I was sunny for 3 hours. I mean, he went after me for like 3 hours. But he's a terrific guy to be around, and he's really, he's incredibly smart. But luckily, I'm older and wilier than he is, so I can. No, it really. I was saying this before to Connor. You know, working at the Daily Wire has been one of the truly great work experiences of my life. They are, everybody there is a close friend. I mean, if I sound like I'm being bland, that's why. Everybody there is a close friend. They are my Christian community. They are the people I sit around and talk theology with. They are, people I can rely on, and it has been a weirdly blissful experience. Well, sorry not to be able to dish more dirt on that.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, let's thank. I don't know where. There it is. All right, let's thank Andrew Clavin one more time for coming out.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the event. Thank you, everyone.